child, and she came here, they were Jewish, and she had the sense that this child might have been a challenged baby. Well, they used to call them mongoloid babies, and we found the grave. The grave was separate from the rest of the family, but we found the grave in the Jewish cemetery. And she was so grateful to know that at least the family cared and loved the child enough. They buried him, but they didn't bury him with his family. That's how those horrible stereotypes, those horrible labels are attached to things. And, you know, and it's so hard to overcome those cultural diversity, but also it just, you know, it's almost impossible to imagine, but it happened. So the synagogue helped. And the men, if their fruit was rotten, a lot of times their stuff would rot because nobody could buy it. So the Benevolent Association and the women in the sisterhood in particular made food, delivered food. They started what, I don't know if you ever lived in the city, but I remember when I lived in Philadelphia as a young wife, I learned about the corporation. What's a corporation? Well, it's like a continuation of what is in here, the Benevolent Association, where groups had money, they didn't charge interest, and you could borrow money if you couldn't feed your family or if you couldn't pay your rent. You could borrow money from the corporation, and then they kept a record, and then you had to pay it back eventually. But there was always a source that goes back to the early immigrants, a source of where to go to get some kind of aid, because, you know, in those days, in a place like this, there was nothing like the Red Cross or anything like that. So they did establish charitable organizations to help those who were really in trouble. And there was the Russian Jewish community here. They came from nothing, and they were extremely poor, and they were not educated. Later on, an Austrian-German group came, and they came prior to the concentration camps, but after Hitler's rise. And they knew, they were smart enough, this handful, because most German Jews thought that they were Germans, and they were Jews second, Hitler's not going to bother them. But these German and Austrian Jews came here, and they became managers of farms, and eventually they became chicken farmers too, because chicken farming got introduced into this agricultural experiment much later, like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and particularly the 40s and 50s, there were chicken farms here. Mostly Vineland and all the small colonies around Vineland were predominantly chicken farms. And a chicken farm, by the way, you have to have a minimum of 10,000 chickens. Can you imagine 10,000 chickens?
By whose standard? Who set that number?
In order to, well, apparently, in order to have any hope for a profit, you have to have that many chickens. And these boys would go and work in clean the chicken do, collect eggs, inoculate the chickens, and then go to school. And then come home from school and go right back and do the same thing all over again. So most of the men that I know were their children who were involved in the chicken farming. They don't even want to see a piece of chicken. They just have a complete aversion to chicken. But going back to these German Austrian immigrants who came, they came many of them were very educated, and when they got here, they couldn't become it. God bless you, sneezed on the truth. They couldn't be a doctor. This man was a doctor in Germany. Here he came and he answered an ad from a German language newspaper in Philadelphia. They came through St. Louis, through a relative, then to Philadelphia, to another relative, and then a German language newspaper brought them to Woodbine, where he became the manager of one of the farms through the agricultural school. So, but they had a very elitist attitude, And they felt that the Russian peasants were so beneath them.
Class.
There was a class culture. As harmonious as it was here, it was still reality, which is why we had a very famous Holocaust historian speak here. His name is Professor Yehuda Bauer. And he said, take that word. There was the original brochure that was printed for this museum, had a word, help me, Ornette. What was the word? Utopia. Utopia, thank you. That this was utopia. And Yehuda said, take that word out of your vocabulary. I'll never forget. He stood upstairs and he said, words cause wars. Always be careful how you use words. He said, harmonious, but not utopian. And he was right. So, so I say it was harmonious here, but it was no utopia. So eventually, when we, as part of our historical documentation, we wear the hat of a place where people come to learn Woodbine history. We wear the hat of a class like yours that wants to know about end of the 19th century and what happened when these communities sprung up. Where did the people come from? How did they survive? How did they prosper? If they prospered. Then we are also a teaching point for kids who live with history in their own backyard and they don't know it. And they come here and they find out such wonderful things. Then we are also a teaching center for the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education. Now, the Commission on Holocaust Education is starting to lean more towards taking the word Holocaust out, and we focus more on bullying and hate and prejudice reduction. Because hate and prejudice reduction and bullying are things that unfortunately have existed probably since Cain and Abel. And so that's where I came up with our mission statement on tolerance, because tolerance is something that you really have to work hard to. It's a word that is carefully chosen, and it develops an idea and a conscious idea and an emotional response to how people treat other people. And we do have a relationship with a number of Holocaust survivors who come here, and or sometimes we bring them to the schools. And they we have a curriculum for students K through 12. Mostly we do 5th through 12th grade, and a survivor can talk to them about what their experience. We have child survivors who are now in their early 80s, but they were children. We have one woman who is a survivor of Auschwitz, and also a survivor of Dr. Joseph Mengele. And she's just phenomenal. She is phenomenal the way she talks to the kids. We have another survivor, Fred Spiegel, who we have focused in our case there. Fred is a child survivor. He was liberated 1 week before his 13th birthday, and he was in 5 different camps. So when we bring kids and for Holocaust education, which is a mandate in New Jersey, but it doesn't mean that the teachers choose to teach it or that the administrations choose to follow the mandate. It's up to each individual administration, and what we've done is develop relationships with the teachers, and we've been very successful in bringing in groups, mostly non-Jewish, but we focus on hate and prejudice reduction. And we have kids from all kinds of, as you know, today, you could get a group of Hispanic students in the room and not one of them would have the same background. Each one might have, their family might come from a different country and speak a different dialect. So we really work on trying to help kids accept each other for who they are. And when they're younger, we can talk to them about well, oh, I don't like Mexican food because it smells. And what do you mean Mexican food smells? How do you know that the friend who sits next to you that eats Mexican food doesn't like your food because your food might smell strange to them? Well, how many times has someone made fun of you because of the way you spell your name? Oh, their hands go up. And or, you know, your hair looks different than her hair. I know, I hate it, they always make fun of me. You get these wonderful responses from kids, and then you can talk to them about how much we think we are so different, but how much we all have in common as human beings. And so we really do a lot in that aspect. And that's something you don't see when you walk in, but it's a program that we've developed in a way that we've been able to reach out to students and make the museum more open to all kinds of groups to come. So,
are there any questions, folks? Oh, there's upstairs.
you know what upstairs is? Upstairs is the original. It's still a synagogue, and we still have services there a few times a year. And we just had, I'll quickly tell you, we just had our June, it's become an annual thing. We have a congregation from Wilmington, Delaware, comes to the park, and they camp, and they walk the 2.5 miles on a Saturday morning for services here, and they do a whole, and in the Jewish religion, the Sabbath is Saturday, and that's when they have the Torah reading, and it's a very long service, so they've been coming every year. And we also do Jewish high holiday services in September for the Jewish New Year, and it's open to everybody, and it's very interesting the kind of people who come. A lot of people who are no longer connected to a synagogue because they've raised their families and they've retired. We get people from Stone Harbor and from Avalon. I'm amazed. And people from Atlantic City and the suburban towns in Atlantic City who come. And we have a rabbi here every year for those 2 days. And one year we actually had a rabbi who was Orthodox, which means that on the high holidays you don't drive. So we rented an RV, and we hooked it up on the back lot, which doesn't exist anymore, because we're having a building built there. And we loaded it up with everything he needed, and his wife cooked his special kosher food, and we had the state police check on him every night for 3 nights, and he lived on the parking lot so that he could do the high holiday services. So we're an egalitarian synagogue. When we do have services, everyone is welcome, men and women. But when you go upstairs, you'll see that there's a gallery on the 3rd level. And in the olden days, that's where the women and the girls sat. The women and the girls sat separate from the men, and the men sat downstairs. Well, we have a gentleman who's now in his 70s. His mother, somewhere around 1962, was getting too old to go up those steps. So she, quote, literally put her foot down and said, that's it, I can't go up there, I'm sitting downstairs. So if you look when you go upstairs, on the right-hand side, up front, the same old linoleum is on the floors. There are heel marks from the women's shoes. And on the other side is where the men sat. They still sat separate, but the women sat downstairs.
1962, feminism just started.
Let me tell you, you know, I mean, there were women that really opened their mouths and spoke up, but wow. Okay, good. So thank you so much, please.
Can you take us upstairs?
I can take you upstairs, fine. But take a deep breath because there's no air conditioning upstairs. It's not bad today, but you have to see upstairs. And also, while we're going upstairs, I can just tell you that people come here and they go upstairs and they cry. If they have any, older people particularly, because it reminds them of their youth or of some experience they had with a grandparent or with a mother and father in any church environment. So, and then we've also had kids. We had night at the museum one night, and we had United Methodist Youth, and they were shocked to find out that the 10 Commandments were in a synagogue. You know, it's so cute. It's so cute. So come on up. We'll go